What is up, YouTube? It is Super Injo here, and I'm bringing you another Dark and Darker Discord series video. Now, in these videos, I bring the most talked about topics or the most common suggestions from the Dark and Darker Discord channels. And today we are going to be talking about the trade system. What we're first going to discuss are the pros and cons that were mostly brought up about adding an auction house. And then we will go into talking about what changes would people like to see to the trade system if no auction house were to be implemented. So with that being said, let's talk about it. All right, so let's get started and let's talk about the most common pros and cons that were brought up in the Dark and Darker Discord channels. So for the pros, it would make buying gear sets much quicker and leaving more time for dungeoneering, so more time to play the game and go in the dungeon. It will not require you to be constantly present. So like the current trade system, you have to constantly be in there siphoning through all the posts and also constantly being in there if you want to sell something as well. It will make gold making much easier and more effective. Obviously, having a method where you could set it and forget it works. And gold making and playing the auction house is something within itself as well. This is also a big one, and I really like this point here. It would help new players with price matching and allow them to sell their gear at appropriate prices. Something to think about. Now, the cons. A lot of people say it's going to ruin the old school feel of the game. Going to a trade forum, looking at all the trade posts. If that was completely removed and an auction house came in, it would lose that sense. It will make the majority of items found in the dungeon unsellable compared to their better stat counterparts, meaning that people are just gonna want to buy the best in-slot gear, and the gear that didn't roll so well will be deemed useless. Which brings us to our next point. In the cons, it will lock people into playing the most OP builds and lower the variety of builds being played. So like I mentioned previously, people, and this is just an example, people are purely going to look for magic damage items when they're building their wizard because they want to be able to one zap their opponents. And lastly, the last con is negotiating prices and player interactions are enjoyable. And if we were to implement an auction house, that would be gone. So those are our auction house pros and cons from the Dark and Darker Discord. Moving on. All right, so now let's get into some of the changes that people want to see if auction house is not implemented. So these are the changes that were discussed, that were brought up in the Dark and Darker Discord when it came to the trade system. So one, people want to wait to identify the seller's class, because this is going to help people potentially trade items or propose items to the seller that they may want. People want filters for item type, item rarity, and specific stats. This brings up the whole, would this not also just promote people playing specific builds if they're able to, filter for specific stats? It's something to think about, because in this way, it's like, my opinion is people are asking for an auction house without really asking for an auction house. But that's a whole nother tangent. Moving on. People want there to be some kind of limit to the chaos. They want, to get rid of the scammers and the spammers and people who don't have the 15 gold to make the trade transaction, and people with no intention of selling their gear. Now, last playtest, there's a lot of people posting their own gear just to show off what they had, and there's also a lot of people trolling and trying to sell their gear for a low price, but they didn't have any gold to make the transaction. This is what the community is referring to. I like this idea that was brought up that would kind of stop with the spammers and the scammers, is potentially making it cost 1 silver per post to the trade forum. Something to think about. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. For the community seems split on making the trade forums for items purely found in dungeon. So for those who aren't familiar with Escape from Tarkov, the flea market or the auction house or the trade system in that game, you could only trade items that were physically found inside the raid, and you would have to successfully extract with it to be able to trade it for gold or for money. And the last change, or the last most popular change, that was brought up in the Dark and Darker Discord channels is that people do not want the first trade request to get covered up. So what happened is, I guess, and it was kind of an issue, if you were like, you know, if you were waiting for someone to sell a certain item and that item popped up and you were the first to request the trade, it would actually, your trade would populate, and then all the other ones that came after yours would go in front of yours. And then a lot of the times this would penalize the person who requested the trade first, because the seller would just click on the trade request that was just immediately in front of them. So with that being said, these are kind of the changes, or well, these are the most talked about changes that the community would like to see. And I'm sorry if I rushed through this video. It was just a lot of content. So please feel free to pause and read the content on the screen for both the pros and cons and for the changes to the trade system. Thank you. All right, guys, that brings us to another end of another Dark and Darker video. And I just want to thank everyone for supporting me and for supporting the channel. And most importantly, for adding to the discussions both here on YouTube and on Reddit. With that being said, guys, please keep in mind that these are not necessarily my own opinions. These are just the most brought up topics, or the most commonly discussed topics on the Dark and Darker Discord. I know I say that a lot, but I have to, because it seems like a lot of people feel like these are my own opinions. What my videos are meant to do is just to promote discussion and conversation. So with that being said, guys, thank you again. Don't forget to tell a loved one that you love them. Super Indo out.